Thanks, friends, for joining us on the Line of Fire. I'm speaking with attorney Rita Dunaway. Her book, Restoring America's Soul, is divided into three parts. Part one, a conservative identity crisis, and part two, tough issues, persuasive conservatism. And tough issues she lists there are caring for the poor, protecting religious liberty, the savvy pro-lifer, and the natural marriage worth conserving. These are issues obviously near and dear to our hearts, and many of them we focused on, talked about on the air. So that's of great interest to me in the book. Then part three is two strategies for restoring America's soul, putting government back in its place and restoring a culture of virtue. And I really want to focus on these last two issues in the book here. Rita, you talk in your book about a convention of states. Many of us don't even know what that is, what you're referring to, and how that ties in with a strategy to restore America's soul. So please explain what this is and then why it could be so important.
I'd be happy to. Well, Article 5 is the part of the Constitution that outlines the ways that we can amend the Constitution, because the Founding Fathers foresaw that there would be a need for that at some point. They knew they weren't perfect. And so there are two ways of doing it. And we've only in America ever used one of the two ways, and that's to have Congress propose amendments, and then those amendments go to the states, and it takes 38 of the states to ratify an amendment proposal. The other route, the one that we've never used before, allows the states to come together in what's called a convention. It's effectively just a meeting of state delegations, and then the state delegations propose constitutional amendments to deal with particular problems on particular topics, which then again get sent back to the states. And again, it takes 38 states to ratify an amendment proposal. The reason this is so important today is because we have a huge problem in this country with federal overreach. And as I mentioned before, the government operating in Washington, D.C. today is not the government that's outlined in the Constitution. I mean, you would never guess by just reading the Constitution that our federal government would be doing all the things that it's doing today. It's eating up all of the power, invading the prerogatives of the state. And by the way, the cost of its doing that is this incredible, immoral national debt that is going to be on the backs of our children and grandchildren for generations. So the reason Article 5 is so important today is because that federal overreach that we see, the way that has come about is by perversion of constitutional language. And I'll just name a couple of examples: the General Welfare Clause, the Commerce Clause, the Necessary and Proper Clause. Because those clauses use broad language, Congress can tax and spend for the general welfare. Well, so Congress and the courts now interpret that to mean Congress can tax and spend for anything it thinks is a good idea, period. And that's not what was ever intended. So that's where Article 5 comes in, is that by using that Article 5 process, the states can come together and put this check on federal power by proposing an amendment, for example, that would restore the original meaning of the General Welfare Clause by further limiting it and saying, no, the General Welfare Clause doesn't mean you can tax and spend on anything you like. It means you can tax and spend in order to carry out your specific powers in the Constitution.
Go to conventionofstates.com, press the button, sign the petition. More importantly, get 10 of your friends to do the same. When you sign the petition, then that sends a letter to your state legislator. You go on the list in their district as a supporter. We deliver those lists to the state legislators. It means something to them.